Alright, this is a follow-up video to the one I did on the New York Times Best Books of the 21st Century, which was a critics list. Someone suggested that I should do the readers list because while there is some overlap, there is quite a lot of new books. So, hey, here it is. This is also the first video that I'm doing since I was first recognized in public, which was kind of cool. So, I guess I'm a very micro influencer now, but Malika, if you're out there, hello. And yeah, really kind of a cool thing to happen in just a account that I started talking about books. But yeah, let's really just talk about some of these lists. I think the differences between the lists are really interesting. There's a lot more popular books, of course, on this list. But just like the critics list, I've read half of them, more than half of them. But I'm only going to be talking about the new entries on the list. If you want to see my reaction to the critics picks, that's a whole separate video. But 39 of the 100 books are on that list. I've read, I think, 27 of those 39, so you can see most of those on that other video. This one, there are 61 new books. I've read 24, I think, of them, so bit of a shorter video. I'm only going to be talking about the 24 books that I've read, but yeah, I think overall it's a bit more uneven of a list. There's a lot of books that I dislike quite a bit more that I have a bit of a harder time justifying on this list, but we're just going to get into some quick literary reviews of why these books should or shouldn't be on this list. And yeah, always fun to talk about literature, and especially more modern literature, because people get bogged down in the classics. But hey, there are some really good new books on here, despite my complaints about some of these. So let's get right into it. We are starting out with Patrick Radcliffe's Empire of Pain. So I think he's on this list and the critics list for Say Nothing, which is his history of the IRA. But this is about the opioid epidemic, and it's a decent history. It's mostly just about the Sackler family and just how corporate greed and all of the machinations. They're less so a whole exploration of the opioid crisis, but it did really help galvanize a lot of action against this. It's a really solid nonfiction book. If you have watched Nan Goldin's documentary about the opioid crisis and activism, is also really, really good. He's interviewed there. But yeah, solid 99. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on nonfiction because it's nonfiction. It's usually solid when it's here. At 94, we already have my first strong objection, which is Paul Murray's The Bee Sting. I already have a whole separate video on my problems with this, but I just think this is a parody of literary fiction. There's just too much backstory in this. The writing is just stream of consciousness for no reason. There's a whole bunch of plot holes. It's just really a failure for me. I did not like this, but if you want longer reviews of it, there's a whole other video on just a failure of a modern novel for me. Did not like this book, and yeah, just not happy to see this on the list. At 93, we have, similar to on the critics list, a book that I started reading and just stopped, which is Remarkably Bright Creatures. For the critics list, it was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. This was just sort of, I think there was a brief period where everyone was really into octopi, and yeah, this just really felt too pop fiction-y for me. The characters were just sort of silly. The narration, perspective switching didn't make much sense to me. I might try to reread it, but yeah, it just was not a book for me. But I'm going to include this on the list because I tried. But at 92, my first really happy book to see on this, which is Olga Tokarczuk, Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. She's a Nobel Prize winner, so obviously you would hope to see her here. I think Flights was on the critics list. If not, it should have been. But this is her more accessible book. It's really, really just quirky and wry with a really dark undercurrent. There's continual jokes about people mispronouncing Polish names, even though they're Polish. The ending I thought was a bit too neat, but I really enjoyed this book. There's this themes of like William Blake and astrology and dreams. And yeah, just a pretty idiosyncratic book that mixed its tone pretty well, which didn't end as well as I thought, but I really enjoyed this book when I read it with my book club. At 91, we have the sensation who is Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian, but he also wrote his most recent book, which is Project Hail Mary. I enjoyed this for what it was. It's sort of a poppy sci-fi thing, and very, very snappy, short chapters. The arachnid life form, which the protagonist bonds with and immediately just like hang out with. It does feel a little silly. It's written to be a movie, but I was read very quickly. It's entertaining enough. It didn't blow me away, I think, like a lot of people did, but it was fun pop fiction. I like Weir as just a sort of general popular fiction author. I think he does well. The writing's snappy. Doesn't do a whole lot of depth for me, but they're fun sci-fi stories, and hopefully they're a entry point for people into reading longer and more in-depth sci-fi stories. And hey, always, again, going to play some Ted Chiang or Octavia Butler on that. At 86, we have a Canadian author who is Jan Martel with The Life of Pi, which is just a juggernaut that people really, really love. This has probably been ages since I've read this book, but I remember it well enough. I thought it was nice. It was really enjoyable, but now it's become like a movie, a Broadway show. My fiance was saying it's really big in Christian circles with some of the themes, but I enjoyed this. It's a solid book that uses a lot of magical realism. The ending, you can sort of take what you want out of the ending, which put this down in my book, but it's a solid literary fiction, and I'm always going to promote the Canadians here, but I don't think Martel needs a lot of promotion, but not too bad to see this on the list. But I think has much more of a popular reputation than a literary one where just everyone has heard of this, rather than it being really influential or really groundbreaking in any sort of literary sense. At 81, we have The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, which again was this really just a phenomenon of nonfiction, which really, I think, opened up the discussion about how Black people have absolutely been exploited by the medical industry, by doctors who just didn't take their lives into account. And it's just a woman who had a really virulent cancer, which became used in all these experiments without her family's permission. All the cells just kept propagating, and so it's always just been used as the cell culture without really taking count of the person that she was. Overall, really, really solid history. I think if you haven't picked this up, it's a really great book to highlight, and I think really should have been on the critics list because, it was just a really influential book, which I think opened a lot of doors to people, and I read it over a decade ago. It's really good. Another controversial selection at 79 is Haruki Murakami with 1Q84, which is apparently a much better pun in Japanese, where it sounds much more like 1984. But I did say in my critics video that I was glad that Murakami didn't make any appearance on this. Of course, he's on here twice. I haven't read Kafka on the Shore, but my fiance also said that she feels that Murakami gets a bit more hate than he deserves. There's plenty of worth authors, but I just really don't like his stuff. I find his translation is always really, really clunky. The female characters are almost non-existent. He really relies on this sort of surreal, magical realism tropes and the same things repeating. And this book was just overlong for me. I did not enjoy it at all. Just did not penetrate anything. It just sort of, again, like The Beasting, felt like a parody of literary fiction for me. If you are a Murakami fan, please don't come for me. There's plenty of other haters out there. I have a difficulty mustering a lot of energy. I've read a bunch of his stuff, including his short stories. The one that I've actually really liked is What You Think About When You Think About Running, which is a nonfiction collection of essays on running. But just his fiction and his style and his themes really do nothing for me. At 76, we have Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson, who's a lawyer who's really helped get people out of jail for the Innocence Project. And just a really good overview, mostly of a main case where someone was wrongfully imprisoned, but he also highlights other ones. If you've read The New Jim Crow, this will sort of fill in things a bit more, but what I found frustrating about this, there's not really a timeline to put a lot of this in context, how things have changed and shifted. Are things getting better? Are things getting worse? But it's a good thing that will put faces to the injustices in the criminal justice system that really targets minorities, particularly Black men. A solid book. But I think New Jim Crow is a bit more groundbreaking and a bit more academic. But as far as a popular way to really get the point across, this is a solid book. At 74, we have Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, and not my favorite book. I've said before, Never Let Me Go is one of the better ones, but I actually like him more as a literary fiction author. I find when he plays with speculative fiction, it doesn't work as well. Of course, it's beautifully, beautifully written, but I found the naivety of the narrator just hid things to, again, try to hit those pop fiction tropes and this whole emphasis on dreams. There's some good things that are hinted at about society and class and changes around things, but it just doesn't give me enough to really dig into. And I thought it was a bit of a miss in trying to blend pop fiction with more literary styles. But I mean, Ishiguro is an incredible, incredible prose stylist, so I think you'll get stuff out of that. But as far as themes and depth, this is not his strong point for me. At 73, we have, of course, the appearance of J.K. Rowling in the last Harry Potter book. And I mean, it's influential, it's really popular. I think, as I said in my video on why people need editors, she stretched these out way too long, and they just don't work nearly as well as something that should be a lot shorter. And she just bought into her own hype so much that now she's one of the largest bigots against the trans community. And yeah, I understand that she's a touchstone for some people, but I would like her to disappear forever because she's a terrible person, and I don't think she should be rewarded with any more attention. At 69, we have David Grann's Killers of the Flower Moon. I've been a huge fan of Grann since his New Yorker days, and if you haven't checked out some of his collections of really interesting articles, those are really great books. I found he's become less interesting since he does these really longer projects, but this is his best sort of nonfiction project. If you've only seen the Scorsese movie, this really just digs into the history a lot better. It really opens up an unexplored part of history. I recently finished his most recent book, The Wager, which is solid, really brings like 18th century British naval traditions to life and talking about a mutiny, but doesn't feel as groundbreaking as this book, which is just a really, really, really good piece of nonfiction, and I think probably the high point of his longer nonfiction works. But check out his magazine articles. They're all really, really good. I wish he would go back to this, but I assume novel writing is a lot more profitable for him, especially when they're adapted into Scorsese movies. But yeah, really, really good book. And yeah, just great history of the terribleness of America, which is, you know, something that we will never really get to the end of. At 68, there's The Devil in the White City, which is true crime serial killer about an early serial killer around the Chicago World's Fair. It's okay. I think if you're into true crime, you'll really like it, but I don't think there's enough here really for a book. And yeah, I just don't find it particularly all that interesting, even when I was more in a true crime thing. But yeah, it's decent unexplored history, but sensationalization of true crime I just find really exploitative and makes me feel a little queasy. So yeah, could have used without this on the list. I was really happy to see Susanna Clarke's Pyreazy at 67. I've been a huge fan of Clarke's since she did Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Even her short stories about fairies are really good. But this is just a really lovely one that I also, again, recommended for my book club. Everyone loved it. And I think it's everyone's, it's been a really good thing because people have been more into sort of weirder fiction with it, people who are not used to it. But again, her style is really interesting. Her prose is great. The central mystery at the start is really good, and I think it flows out beautifully. It's relatively short, and yeah, just Clarke is just a master at what she does. I love her work. Really happy to see Pyreazy. Everyone check out Pyreazy. It's not my favorite book ever, but it's a really solid bit of weird but accessible and lovely fiction. I will briefly jump out of the readers list to talk about one of the critics books lists that I had not read, I don't think, when I did my critics video, but this is The Sympathizer, which has now been made into an HBO miniseries with Robert Downey Jr. I was really interested in this because it's about like a spy who's just sort of a double agent and follows him as he goes to America. I found this book to be really disappointing. It starts out really interesting, but the author really doesn't have anything to say, and in the end he just comes out with this waffling word argument, which is trying to be in-depth, but you just know he doesn't have anything really to wrap it all together. So this was a huge disappointment for me. Yeah, it just did not cohere well. There are some good scenes, but it starts to fall apart as soon as it gets to the Hollywood, and he just doesn't know what to do with it and comes out with this sort of weird, it's both sides semantic argument and does not succeed wrapping it all up for me. But what was really good, even with all the hype, and it took me forever to read this and I shouldn't have, at 56 is The Hunger Games, which was billed to me as young adult fiction, and in a way it is, but just the darkness in this, how it really deals with real world issues of trauma, PTSD, just colonization, the class issues, violence. It's just so, so good. And one of the best young adult and one of the best dystopian books and series I've read. Just The Hunger Games is really good. I haven't read any of the newish ones because I find this collection, this original series, just almost a perfect thing of just the horrors of war and pain and class. Really, really good. If you've avoided it because of the hype and it's a bit of a pop thing, this is, like with My Brilliant Friend, incredible. Really, really good. Not super literary, but just a really good exploration of themes in a way that is really accessible to people and is just going to stick with you forever. At 54, we have our only appearance, I think, of Stephen King with 11/22/63. And honestly, I'm not super sad that this is on the list. I don't think I would put it nearly this high, but when I did my video ranking all of the like 25 Stephen King books that I've read. This honestly ranked pretty high. I just find Stephen King's exploration of history and just what he does with the story, even though it's a bit long, and again, he's trying to figure out the ending as he goes, is a really good book as far as more popular fiction goes. And yeah, I think this just stuck with me. Stephen King doing pretty good in the latter part of his career. This would probably have been like at 100 if I put this on the list. The fact that it's this high, I mean, hey, again, Stephen King doing a bit more literary stuff, and he does have a lot of talent for characterization. So at 50, about halfway through the list, but almost through all of this because the overlapping and the top 50 becomes a lot more with the critics list, is Percival Everett's James, which actually I also just finished this year. And honestly, it's the Percival Everett that I've liked the most. I wasn't really much of a fan of American fiction, which I felt didn't go far enough with its satire. As I said on the critics list, I wasn't a huge fan of The Trees. But James, I think because Everett is constrained by the Huck Finn story, is quite good. It takes that sort of old school adventure story where there's a plot that keeps everything moving. The ending gets relatively dark and twisty, I think, as it should. But yeah, I thought this was decent. Didn't wow me, but this is by far the Everett that I've enjoyed the most. I think because he's riffing on a really successful author and he's less inclined to go through some of his things of just messiness and not really knowing what to do that really took me out of some of his other books. So yeah, James is a solid book and a really good piece of Americana, which is good to see on this list. At 49, we have again a literary sensation, which is Gone Girl, which I enjoyed. It's fun, pop fiction. It's got a lot of twists and just like, oh my God, will you the reveal? But I don't think it's the greatest book of the 21st century. But I will say it was really, really influential as far as just other much lesser derivative works with similar titles. So, I mean, I don't think it was influential in a good way, but it's probably one of the better ones of this sort of genre work. But it's just a silly thriller. I don't think you should read too much into it, but it was well done. Sure, 49, why not? At 48, we have Ocean Vuong on Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, which I did enjoy. It's a very sort of themey, just vibey book. You can really tell that a poet wrote this as his first time book. Doesn't really have a huge amount of plot. It's letters from a son to his mother, but the language can be really beautiful, and I just thought it was nice, but doesn't really hit as much because it's very much a debut book by a poet, but it's a nice bit of prose from Vuong, and I really do need to check out his new book, which is apparently a lot more plot heavy and a lot better. So yeah, let's check it out. At 40, we're just going to name check The Kite Runner because I have read it, but so long ago that I remember absolutely nothing about it other than I liked it. So I actually sort of have a neutral viewpoint on this, but I know a lot of people, this was a really a touchstone book for them. So I assume it's quite good. But I might have to reread this, and I think we'll go into that when we go into the lessons at the end, a list of what I need to read and not read. But at 27, we have Sally Rooney with Normal People, and I did a TikTok video on this, but I will go against people and the Sally Rooney backlash because I actually find her novels quite good. I really like the characters, her focus on intimate relationships and sort of hetero-optimism, as it's been called, I think is nice. I think she's not trying to do more than she is, and she really captures the thing of bourgeois people just talking and groaning about class but not really doing a lot and just focusing on their personal lives. They're really good stories. I liked Intermezzo. Normal People has really frustrating characters, but that's sort of the joys of it, and she's a really solid stylist and writer, and yeah, I think she deserves a lot of her acclaim. I'm happy to see Sally Rooney on this list, and I think a lot of the backlash that she's gotten is not well deserved because yeah, she's a good person from all I've read and a really good writer. So read her. At 21, we have one of the books that I said I wish was on the critics list, which is Yagyasi's Homegoing, which I really, really loved. I think it's one of the best debut novels I have ever read. Just the way that she stitches intergenerational longing and trauma and love and just this homegoing of America and Ghana. Incredible, beautiful characters, prose, style, hits everything. Her second book didn't do that at all for me, but this is just still a standout. Really glad to see this recognized, and one of the ones that I will go to bat for that, yeah, the readers had this right, the critics had this wrong. Really glad to see this on the list. At number 11 though, is a book is a book that I agree so much with Andrea Long Chu as just a complete hater, which is Hanya Yanagihara's A Little Life, which to me is just torture porn in literature. It is just those sort of horrorcore, like a Serbian film, if you know about those really extreme horror torture films. That's this in literary form. None of it makes any sense. All of these gay characters are super successful. They're a friend group. All of them achieve monumental success. Jules is just tortured by Yanagihara for the whole thing for just a very false sense of pathos. I hated this book. I disagree so fundamentally with what it's trying to achieve artistically, which is just force pain on the reader for no reason. I think Andrea Long Chu called it just like puppets that Yanagihara operates. Do not read it. It is bad. I'm really disappointed to see this high on this list, and I'm really disappointed that a lot of people like this because it's so exploitative and it's so depressing and it's just painful for no reason. Read some Fernanda Melchor if you want to suffer for literature. Do not read this. Finally, at number 2, we have Anthony Doerr's All the Light We Cannot See, which I didn't like very much. It's basically an Oscar bait of literature. It's World War II. You've got like a starstruck love story, but it's essentially the characters don't matter. They're swept along by these events, and you just know how it's all going to go forward. It's really trying to be grand and sweeping, but it just feels forced. The prose is nice enough, but there's like this weird Nazi antique collector antagonist, which just doesn't make sense. He's trying to add some sort of danger and anything to this book, but yeah, it just feels like a bad Spielberg attempt in novel form. So I get why a lot of people liked it, but just was not for me. It just felt very forced. And yeah, I just think Oscar bait is a good description of this book. So overall, what did I get out of the readers list that I might not have gotten out of the critics list? Well, I think there are a few more just sort of fun books in here that I do like. There are a lot of bad books that I was not a huge fan of. I think the largest one is, again, A Little Life, but also things like Seeing Sapiens in nonfiction, which is just not particularly good. Every summary I've read of it just makes it sound, again, like pop science, which is trying to explain something which is just not particularly in-depth or interesting and just becomes this sensation without really showing anything. So I'm not going to be reading Sapiens. I do have to read some Abraham Verghese. One of my friends in my book club has told me to read one of his books, and I think 2 are on this readers list that aren't on the critics list, so maybe I have to check him out. I also should try to reread Ottessa Moshfegh's My Year of Rest and Relaxation. I read a short story collection of hers, which I really disliked, and My Year of Rest and Relaxation really started a trend of very inactive protagonists, which I really dislike in literature, but I think just because it's always there and I want to become a really much more dedicated Mosfegh hater, I might read that. But yeah, I also should probably reread some Khaled Hosseini, who did The Kite Runner, and another book on this list. As for what this means for the overall list, I think, yeah, it makes sense that there's a lot of books here that are much more good for entertaining stories than really great literature, which will sit with you for a long time and have really interesting themes and great prose. But a lot of them are pretty solid, entertaining literature that were bestsellers, and I can sort of see why they're on here. So I don't really hate this list that much, though there are quite a few like cringy moments. Overall, the fact that there is such an overlap of 39 books is quite nice, and I will continue to say that My Brilliant Friend should always be at the top there. So yeah, if you've read both of these lists, what are your thoughts on the readers list versus the critics list? Are there some books that you still see that haven't mentioned? Again, I think there needs to be much more of a focus on more international literature, Asian, African, Eastern European, as well as South American. There's quite a few South American writers that I think are missing on this. But overall, relatively solid list. And yeah, I will see you next time for a book list. I might do my top reads of 2024 because we are 6 months through the year. I know I said I would do it when I got to 1,000 subscribers, but I think I'm still like 150 away, and it's getting a bit awkward. But yeah, we're not about subscriber count because I have been recognized in public. So I think I can take that as being a micro influencer and a YouTuber now. So As always, like, subscribe, leave comments and reactions about what you think of this list and some of the books, because I always like engaging with people down there. I find the conversations can be really good in these sort of longer discussions that YouTube allows. And yeah, I also might do a video on how my reading year has been this year, because I've read over 60 books and there's been some highs, some real lows, and I think I've read a good variety, so I might do that next. But until then, keep reading. I'll talk to you next time. And yeah, if you see me wandering around, say hi, because it was actually kind of nice. So talk soon.